Okay, so I want to talk about when we were figuring out the axis, the x-axis, how we were going by. So our first example that we did, our C or our phase shift, where we needed to start plotting our points was at pi. And our intervals were going by pi over 4. So we went pi over 4, which is 1/4. Then we did 2/4, which makes pi over 2. Then we did 3/4, which makes 3 pi over 4. And then we did 4/4, which makes 1 whole pi. So because pi over 4 becomes pi when I go by pi over 4s, I already have this C on my table. So I have my pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and then pi, okay, which is what I need. I need to have that C on my graph. Okay, so that one was easy. Then we had number 2. So number 2 was even easier because number 2, my C was pi over 2, and my intervals were pi over 2. So if I'm going by pi over 2s and I need to get a pi over 2, I'm fine. That's easy, okay? But I want to talk about if it's not as easy, okay? So pretend I have pi over 3 as my phase shift, and my intervals are pi over 2. If I go by pi over 2s, I have 1 over 2, then 2 over 2, which makes pi. So, excuse me, and before that would be 0. So this is actually somewhere in between here. The 1/3 is in between 1/2. So that's going to make it harder to plot my points. So if you want to be able to do it the way we've been doing it, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do pi over 3, make sure that's on your graph, and then you're going to have to figure intervals from there. So you're going to have to do some math. You're going to have to say pi over 3 plus pi over 2. So I need a common denominator. So this would be 2 over 6 plus 3 over 6, which makes 5 over 6 would be my next one. And then I'd have to take 5 pi over 6 and add my pi over 2 again, which I can just use the common denominator I already had. So that makes 8 pi over 6, which is going to reduce down to 4 over 3 pi. And then I'd have to take that. I'm just going to keep it with a 6 so that I can use my common denominator. That will make 11 pi over 6. And then I'd have to also go backwards. So think about it. If this is 0, I'm not going to be plotting points on 0. Okay, because the distance between these two is not going to be my correct distance of pi over 2. So if I wanted to go backwards, I'd have to subtract. So I'd have to say pi over 3 minus pi over 2. So if I erase this work here, if I have pi over 3 minus pi over 2 and find my common denominator, that's 2 pi over 6 minus 3 pi over 6, which is negative pi over 6. So on the other side of the 0, I could just put negative pi over 6, and we would just know that our axis is somewhere inside here, okay? And then you could do it the same way that I already taught you,